Good Friday morning. We will let some people get into the Zoom room and then we will get started. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Mm.
Should we go into intros for now? Just got
Yeah,
a few people who've come in. We might as well get started with this
yeah,
stuff and then we can get into the good stuff.
that sounds good. Uh, okay, thank you, Sonia. Hello, everybody. Welcome back or welcome here for the first time. Um, Today, Tom Grothe and I are gonna talk about courage. And this is Tom and I love doing these together. Some of you may have seen previous ones. This one will get range from philosophical to emotional, historical, all sorts of fun things. Um, but before we get into the meat of the talk, just to remind folks how these work. This is a safe place to think and feel. So there are really no rules except for basic kindness and respect. And no one is expected to participate, but are very welcome to participate actively. And we'll cut over to Sonia for some instructions on how to do that. But other than that, just kick back, relax, take it all in, jump in, whatever feels right. And then, yeah, why don't we kick it over to you, Sons?
Thank you. So after BJ and Tom have gone through the slides, we'll have an opportunity to speak with you and ask or answer any questions you may have or just any thoughts that came up for you. And you can do that in two ways. You can click the raise hand button and we will unmute you and you can chat with Tom and BJ. And if you prefer not to speak out loud, you can type it into the Q&A section and I will read it out loud to both of them to address. The chat is also open. So if anything comes up for you while they're speaking, please feel free to put it in there. And thank you again for being here.
Great. Thank you, Sons. Guys, maybe if you don't mind, I'll take a quick second. Today's uh, just a special day in my family's life. It's the anniversary of my sister Lisa's death. And so I just want to name that um, and name her. And at least for me, this will be a particularly meaningful experience with you all. It's an important day. So thanks for sharing it. Now, um, Tom Grothe, you guys have seen him up here before. I love Tom. I love your mind, and the rest of your body too, your heart, everything. Tom. So Tom's a lot. So Tom's works with us at Mental Health as a counselor, but Tom's got a lot of experience before mental health was ever around, working in the world of hospice for many years, running a beautiful place called Coming Home Hospice, a place I've long admired, a very important piece of San Francisco history, and has been in private practice, seeing couples and doing all sorts of beautiful things. So welcome back, Tom. Over to you. This is your brainchild, and you've done a lot of work researching the subject. So welcome.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. It's always a pleasure to be here with the Mettle group and to be sharing some of my work and research around various topics that have meaning to me. And I love sharing it with Sonia and with BJ and the team. And so what I want to talk about today with BJ and Sonia is courage. And this comes about directly from my personal experience, which is I have watched people die for 45 years, literally observed probably 1,000 or more end of deaths, and watched families and sick patients face what is coming to them with so much grace and courage. And over those 45 years, I always ask myself, I don't think I have that. I don't know if I'm brave enough, courageous enough to face the truth of my decline, my loss of my loved one, etc. So I'm always challenged to consider how I would respond to terrible events. And I know that many people in the Mettle community are facing hard truths, are struggling with illness or their loved one's illness, and are looking for ways that they can stay strong, honor their loved one, battle through, courageously accept. So that's what this talk is about, and I hope that it is relevant and meaningful to you guys. Partly what we're going to do today is delve into human history's perception of courage. And we'll do it pretty quickly because I want to get to the meat of what courage is and how we can build it and how we can make it more real in our life. So with having said that, anything to add to that, BJ, or we can move to the next slide?
No, I think that's a perfect setup, my friend. Why don't we
All right.
jump on in?
So the first thing I wanted to try to do, which I always try to do when I research a topic, is define what I'm researching. And courage is one of the elemental emotions or vital things in a human relationship that have been talked about for 3,000 years. And it's been talked about a little differently over time. And so I think it's reasonable to delve into that. But Aristotle basically described courage as the rational mean between the extremes of cowardice and foolhardiness. And that is something that I will come back to over time, because I think that's quite relevant even today. And then Plato, who was Aristotle's student a billion years ago, he said it's the ability to remember what is worth prizing and what is worth fearing. And then existentialists, which I think both BJ and I fall into this camp. An existentialist is someone who believes that the world itself has no determined meaning and that it is up to each individual to find the meaning in their life. And so living to an existentialist is an act of courage in the face of non-being, in the face of no meaning in life, that you are creating the meaning. And the last thing in defining courage is that in many aspects of people discussing courage, they speak of both standing firm and fighting I mean in quotations, but being strong and courageous while accepting the intractable realities of which we live. And I think that harkens back even to Aristotle, that someone can be foolhardy if they don't know what it is they're fearful of, if they aren't really connected to what it is they fear. So when you talk about courage, you're always talking about being aware of what you are frightened of.
That's beautiful, Tom. Yeah, and that connects all these different ways in. I just want to harken on that harp on that for a second. That it seems to be a sort of a common denominator, depending on no matter what sort of belief system or philosophical system you're coming from. There's some irreducible requirement of tuning into yourself, knowing yourself on some level.
I think that's right, BJ. And I think that even across these different thinkers and philosophies, we do find some irreducible truths that define what courage is. And so let's move to the next slide and talk about some of these different folk. And this is a slide talking about the history of courage through time. So up in the upper left, you have battles being fought and physical courage. And many of us, what first comes to mind when we talk about courage. But courage is also a young mother alone in the world caring for her baby. And courage is also a man getting his groceries and standing in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square, firmly standing for what we believe, taking a position that is not popular because you know it's the right thing, like the Olympic fellas did in 1964 in Mexico. So that's just a point that over time, over a history of humanity, what is courageous has shifted or grown and had more facets to what is courageous.
And to your point as well, Tom, and these are sort of monumental examples in a sense. But in some level, getting out of bed in the morning requires courage. There's to your point about another undercurrent here is that life's just hard. Period. In the face of trying to be fully alive, knowing it could all go any second.
Absolutely true.
Nothing is out of the bounds of courage.
And I forget who defined it, but they basically said courage is extraordinary action in ordinary times. And so courage is available to everyone, and you make an absolutely true point. If you're facing the intractable realities of your life, courage is sometimes getting out of bed and moving on. And that's what I was trying to say at the beginning of my talk when I said, I have watched so many courageous acts, as courageous as the guy in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square, but they are personal and intimate, and I got to witness them.
Yeah, beautiful.
Let's talk some about Hindi myths. The Mahabharata is one of the oldest poems known to man. And this is a picture of Krishna as the chariot for Arjuna. And basically, I go back this far because Krishna advises he wants Arjuna to align himself with his divine nature and cultivate courage through self-realization. And that true courage lies in doing what is morally right, regardless of the consequences. I think that's kind of hot because in cultures across the world, people were talking about courage as more than just fighting. I will say, however, that this picture is accurately depicting a battle. So, okay, anything to add to that, BJ? It's just, I want to move through these.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a funny side note or important side note about the Mahabharata. Like, there's a really amazing line where there's a man talking to the spirit of a lake and basically the gods, and I may be butchering this, but basically asks the god, or God quizzes the man. It was like, what is the greatest wonder of the world? And the greatest wonder of the world is basically stated to be the fact that we're all mortal, and yet we walk around daily, without any sense of that big truth, without keeping that truth in mind. That is the greatest wonder of the world. How do we humans ignore this basic fact, which is a fascinating undertow to your comments about the
Sounds like a whole nother topic around
other topic.
Value of denial. So I think you and I will be there next year about that.
I think so. But I think also it helps us tune in to remember that courage has a lot to do with being real with what is actually happening. And that, I feel, is the link here. So, amen. All right, well, moving on.
The Greeks had a lot to say about courage. And Aristotle is mostly the remembered one because he wrote a bunch of essays in his conversations with Greek generals about how to stay courageous in the battlefield. So that's cool. What I like about the Greeks is they transitioned. And this is a picture by David of Socrates drinking hemlock. Socrates was condemned to death by the powers that be because they didn't like his teachings. And so here he is facing an intractable reality and choosing to give a lecture to his loving students at the same time. And this, I think, is possibly the first depiction of moral courage in Western civilization. Maybe the Mahabharata got us some of that. But this is this clear example of courage not on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm. And that, I think it also points to the fact that he's teaching through that. That implies so much cool stuff, that this is like a work in progress, that we're continuously learning, that this is an effort, that we don't just arrive at courage and hang out there, that this is a continuously being created, being realized in the world, and that no act is separate from it or needs to be separate from it.
I also look at this picture and realize the impact that he is having on his students, which will then reverberate far beyond his death. That those men, it's Greek, right? That those fellas are going to have more courage after witnessing this courage. Moral courage builds moral courage.
That's beautifully said. And yeah, well, I think, yeah, let's leave that on a high note. There's so much more to talk about. But I guess I just want to say this. Well, this one thought is that, that whatever we do, by virtue of being social creatures, that we are with each other, affecting each other, every action that we take has some symbolic value too, to others watching. It can mean, it takes on meaning. And I don't have a historical linkage here, but looking for these through lines, it feels like there's something important to acknowledging the symbolic value of our action beyond ourselves too. Not that we need to be weighed down about with the idea that everyone's watching per se. It's just to note that whatever we do can take on symbolic significance to people around us and can become a source of courage for them. It gets passed around.
Yes, our socialization is a source of courage, and we will get to that, because I think that is a vital, when you're looking at moral courage or vital courage, that the people we love and the people around us can be the source of that courage. Okay, let's move on, because I don't want to get too stuck.
Yeah.
The Stoics exist about the same time and about the same place as the Greeks. So I'm sort of mudging it all together. But the Stoics, as a philosophical belief system, had a lot to say about courage. They're sort of the early 3rd century BC. And basically, the Stoics say a lot, but they basically say, you're not in control of everything. You are in control of some things. Focus on the things that you can control. I think that plays very directly into AA. Like I think the AA system, the Serenity Prayer is very much about that, recognizing what you can control and what you can't control. Another thing that the Stoics talk about is that is something that I am sorry, I needed to name that, and that is called the dichotomy of control. And that is something very important to the Stoics, is recognizing what you can change and putting your attention on those things that you can change. And Stoicism, in some ways, gets a bad rap in today's world because it's perceived as overly rigid. And it is, to some degree, but they had a lot of really hot stuff that ended up getting reinterpreted. I think the existentialists took a lot of what Stoics were saying, because the Stoics do not promise a world that's devoid of pain, but instead they attempt to equip us with the mental strength to get through your life. So you look honestly, once again, facing the intractable realities. And the last thing about Stoics that is important to point out is that they focus very much on something called apatheia. And that's from the same language root as apathy, and it's totally different. And this is where it gets misunderstood. Apatheia is an inner tranquility and serenity in the face of what is your life. And that's the exact opposite of apathy. apathy, in fact, is non-connectedness to your world, not caring. And they make the point that apathy over time becomes cowardice. Apatheia is that neutral reality which allows you to look at your reality, look at what you can change, and proceed in a right course. And that is courage.
Mm. And to your point, it's not an I think the part of the bad rap that you're pointing to is that Stoics somehow may be perceived as unemotional, that there's no space for the feelings of all this. That's not what I'm hearing you point to. It's not being numb or ignoring your emotions, but it may have something to do with not being super reactive to your own emotions.
Yeah, and doesn't that sort of hearken to Buddhist thinking?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in our
My
meditative
way of
state,
understanding. Yeah.
watching. So I just find it interesting. A lot of people try on different aspects of what is courageous. And let's finish with the existentialists.
Mm-hmm.
We really are going to get to other stuff, folks. So I will get you on.
Mm-hmm.
The existentialists, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Camus, Sartre, they all proclaim that courage is not the absence of despair, which we've talked about before. But it's facing non-being and fear, but moving ahead despite despair. So,
right. So again, you're not kicking out despair. You're not pretending to not be despairing.
Yeah, you're owning it, but you're moving ahead. And that is the courageous act, which means everyone facing pain and suffering has an opportunity to build meaning and purpose in how they move forward. I'm not saying you have to make a cancer diagnosis a blessing, because it's not. But I am saying the way you respond to tragedy and loss in your life is your choice. And that's what the existentialists say. So make it a good one.
Yeah, amen. And Viktor Frankl is a great example of this way of thinking from our 20th century. And
yes, Viktor Frankl
right
said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, now we're getting into some of the meat of courage. What is the nature of courage? And I think you guys have heard this already, but there are different types of courage that have defined themselves over the history of humanity. The first we understand is physical courage, going out and hacking away in a courageous manner on the battlefield. But moral, emotional courage, I view that as having a sense of being something bigger than yourself, knowing what is right, standing in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square, protesting oppression at home by putting a fist in the air. These are acts of moral courage where you are taking a stand despite the consequences. And the last type of courage, which is a little different, is vital courage. And that's basically many of us at Mental Health fighting for our life, fighting for our loved ones, confronting chronic, progressive, and terminal illnesses requires a certain type of courage. And I think it's good to pull that out, and we're going to tease that a little and look into it. The point I want to take back, and the point that a lot of these different philosophies are making, is that to truly be courageous, you need three aspects. There are three aspects to courage. First is you need to be fearful. You need to know what you're fearing. You need to take an appropriate action based on your fear. And that appropriate action should be driven by a higher purpose. So I hope that makes sense, but to take it into an actual, if your partner is diagnosed with cancer, you are fearful they're going to die. And your appropriate action might be to take time off from work and to take them back and forth to the doctor and to build up their nutrition and to make sure their life is as easy as possible. And the higher purpose of that is love. The higher purpose is honoring who this person is, that your actions in service are driven out of a love and an honoring of who that person is. So does that bring that home? Does that make sense to folks?
It does. And, it's helpful to think about your same example without that third piece of the puzzle, without that higher purpose. A lot of acts can be courageous in, an action in facing in the face of fear. But without that higher purpose, the what's compelling that courageous act could be something pretty pernicious or self-aggrandizing, or something that we might not consider such a higher purpose. So for to qualify as courage, that linkage to something beyond yourself seems really key here and not so obvious.
It is vital, and it is also a possible key to building your courage, to finding your courage, if you find your meaning. So, and we're going to talk about that. A couple other points that I want to make is that courage does not mean success. There are many courageous acts and many courageous people who on the outside failed, but they may not view that they failed. Yeah, their loved one may have died, but they were there for them and they saw them all the way through, and they feel good about the service that they provided, and they knew that they had honored the value of their loved one's life. This is not a failure. It's just not the success that you envisioned for yourself.
And I also want to oops, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, BJ.
Well, it's sort of like your point here, how this something of a dialectic, that to have the courage, you have to have the fear. And even to stick with the language of success, that often requires some failing along the way. So, folks that you and I have seen who have stuck with each other through all sorts of difficult times, including illness, that doesn't mean there are moments along the way where they didn't show up or, fell down on the job one way or another. Those could be really important learning moments and a foil for when the courage kicks back in, or the thing that can prompt you or compel you to try again and to find that courage. So there's a dance between success and failure, fear and courage. As so often comes up in our conversations, you need both sides of the coin in a way. You can't just hang out on the plus side and ignore the negatives or something like that.
People may remember our talk on hope. And one of the things in that talk we spoke of, to have hope, you must have uncertainty. So that is yet another dialectic where we learn that the not necessarily the opposite, but the thing we fear, the uncertainty, the scariness of life, are the things that give us hope and that give us courage. And so sometimes welcoming those scary emotions and situations into our life are the things that bring us to our stronger self. So the other point is that courage is a gray virtue. And by that, it is meant that there are many Nazis who were courageous. You can have a sick higher purpose. So I'm gonna leave it at that, and we can move on to the next slide. But it's something to consider. Courageous people are not always right.
Yes, right. And that's back to that key third ingredient of the higher purpose.
That's right.
To qualify here in this construct. Yeah. Okay. Shall we move along, my friend?
Yep.
Okay. Ooh, where am I? There we go.
Okay. So I spoke about really, really old philosophies. I want to talk about some philosophies maybe 100 years old or 10 years old. The biggest one is Paul Tillich. He wrote a book called The Courage to Be. And he talks about how courage life is a balance between courage and fear, and you strengthen courage by realizing and asserting your being. So he's basically saying knowing who you are can give you more courage. And I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. I don't want to spend a long time on them, but Rollo May wrote another book, sort of a love letter to Paul Tillich, called The Courage to Create. And these are all in my references at the end of the talk. But in that, he says that apathy adds up in the long run to cowardice, and that he makes a distinction that besides physical, moral, and vital courage, he talks about social courage and also creative courage. And so, you know, the courage to create, to step outside of what is known, is an act of courage in itself that doesn't really fall in some, you know, your personal creativity. And social courage, you know, sometimes for me, just showing up at a party is an act of courage. You know, it's like, oh shit, I gotta talk to people. And so, you know, there are all kinds of courage in the world, and I love that he brought them up. Miguel de Unamuno wrote in the 1920s, so he's a little bit older. But he once again said that courage can be developed, it can be cultivated, and that it is once again tied to an individual's identity and their search for meaning. So they all sort of cycle back, even back to the Greeks around some of that stuff. And the last person on courage is Shane Lopez, who was a very important voice in positive psychology, wrote a lot about hope. That's where I first discovered him. Also wrote about courage. It's a very brave man. And he talks about the necessary components of courage as freedom of choice, fear of a situation, and a willingness to take risks with an uncertain but morally worthy end. So that, to me, that summarizes many of the three tripods of courage. And the one comment about Dr. Lopez is that he killed himself in 2017, a little after his edited book on hope came out. And he was chronically ill and he had severe depression. And I think it's always good to rope around. Here he is thinking hopefully, thinking around what to give courage. And maybe his act of suicide was the act of courage. So I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's interesting to look at what people can offer the world and then what their life looks like.
And that rigorous subjective quality here. And there's a lot in here. I mean, as we've talked about, higher purpose really matters. And that starts to head towards something relatively, perhaps in morality, you know, you'd like to believe there's some relative objectivity there. But it's not so simple. And where humans are concerned, the subjective objective differentiation can kind of get wonky. And it feels to me, in knowing about Dr. Lopez's end, it reminds me that just about any act can be imbued with courage. It has something to do with what's going on in the person doing the thing. So an act, say, ending one's own life, isn't necessarily inherently in this construct. There are so many other frameworks, religion, etc. But in this framework that we're talking today, it is not inherently a good or bad thing. But what you bring into that act.
Yeah, I love that, BJ, because it's not even inherently a courageous act until you understand it in the personal structure of that individual. And so, you know, we may look at things and view them as cowardly or courageous, but until we understand the totality of where someone is, we don't know that.
That's right.
Okay, let's move on to next slide. I also want to say that there's been a lot of notes coming in the chat, and I really want to get to all of them, but I'm sort of barreling into what I wanted to say, and hopefully we will have time to to review and honor all of that. So I'm sorry if I'm forging ahead.
No, it's great, Tom. Yeah.
Facing illness with courage. There are a couple things that I think we learn, and this, of course, is very, very important to us at Mental Health, because this is where we are challenged to be courageous, is in facing our own illness or those of people we love. When we distinguish between the types of courage, we discover that physical courage decays over time, but moral courage tends to increase. I love that. So you're out in the battlefield hacking off arms, and eventually you start to be like, shit, I'm tired and I wonder what I'm doing, and this gets exhausting. But moral courage builds on itself, and over time can actually be strengthened. But illness and slow decline can cause a loss of the higher purpose, or a loss of the remembrance of the higher purpose. And by that, I mean day in and day out, changing the diapers of someone you love gets to be just a real not good thing. And you can forget why you're doing it. What is the higher purpose to your service? You know, you can be just overwhelmed by that. And so we learned that reminding ourselves regularly what the purpose is of our right action can help us sustain our moral courage over time. And then Emerson had that lovely, lovely quote. Each of us has a deep remedial force that is stirred by cruel disappointments and adversity. Secret forces do not awaken until we are pricked and stung and sorely assailed. Making the point that everyone has courageousness within them, and that stepping up to the terrible, intractable reality that you are facing at the moment, you have the opportunity to be courageous. And maybe you don't even know how courageous you can be. You know, you might surprise yourself.
I love that point. That can lend so much interest and fascination and curiosity to what any of us are going through and will go through, and what parts of ourselves and each other will get to see summoned by life's difficulties. Another dialectic point, you could say. But also, we don't really know what we're capable of sometimes in something until something summons it. The need is summoned. Yeah, and you're also making the point too. I want to really harp on this. I know I'm with you, Tom. We'll get moving here to get to the conversation. But this point about we even use it in our language, of course. Decline. It's important to say, the body may be declining. This is such important. We just talk about the decline that comes with old age. But it's really, there's a lot that, yes, by some measure in the physical sense, and our sort of physical capacity is waning, but in some real way, there is a decline there. And on these other planes, spiritual, moral, the plane of courage, we can be in ascent. We can be crescendoing into our death, even amidst the decline. So just want to point out the incomplete nature of the word we often use with illness, with decline. It's just on that physiological plane.
I love that. I think that's exactly right. And it sort of distinguishes the different forms of courage, and that some of them can be very powerful on our deathbed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Beautiful.
So how do we grow courage? How do we stay strong in the face of adversity? The Stoics literally had 6 different exercises. So we're talking from 2,500 years ago. They talk about knowing the dichotomy of control, which is once again recognizing what you can control and what you can't. An example of that is, I can't control the cancer's reaction to chemotherapy. I can control how I am responding to those events. Other things they talk about is exercising voluntary discomfort. And basically that is just challenging yourself a little bit on the thing you fear the most. This is often done in conditioning therapy around making people look down, people frightened of heights, and taking them up progressively higher ledges. You can do that in your fear of dying or your fear of death. And one way of doing that is in premeditation malorum. And that basically is consider what could go wrong. Think about the bad outcome, because it can desensitize you in some way and can also make you think about what you're going to do in those circumstances. So premeditation malorum is, well, maybe my husband will die. And here's how that will look and how it might feel. So you try it on for a while and you see how best to respond. And actually, 4 and 5 are very similar to that. The view from above is very Stoic. It's asking you to take a step back and view your tragedy from above. And objective representation is a similar thing of asking you to describe what is happening in your life without emotion. And this, the Stoics, they're really sort of big into that. But there can be value in considering something without emotion, because it can give you sort of a way through without getting tripped up in the horribleness of the situation. And lastly, it's journaling. Journaling with a specific focus of identifying what your strengths are and identifying a time you were courageous and what that looked like for you. So I think these are pretty current. These are things you can do now. These are things that therapeutic interventions actually do. But these are from Stoics 2,500 years ago.
It's some timeless stuff. And I, as I listen to you, I just want to keep calling out that I think this, again, we're not talking about ignoring feelings. It can get pretty heady, can feel pretty cognitive. But that is a piece of the puzzle. That's not the whole puzzle. So even with the dichotomy of control, while it's, tuning into what we can and can't control, so we know where to focus our action, our energies, on focusing on what we can control. But I don't think that means, I doubt the Stoics meant that means ignoring all that you can't control, because in that half of the picture are lots of feelings, lots of wonderment, lots of all sorts of stuff. So it's not to ignore that portion of the picture at all.
Well, I think today it is absolutely not to ignore those feelings. I suspect that 2,500 years ago, the Stoics they bought this. And so I totally agree with you that some of these are not always appropriate and just one aspect. And you certainly don't want to move away from your fear, because if you're not in touch with your fear, you're never going to be courageous. Right. So let's go to the next slide, because I think you make an excellent point around the Stoics. Good is a researcher around courage, and he's alive now. And so he's got some more ways that you can do courage that may do more honor to your feelings. And so those may resonate more with us because we are more fully human than the Stoics were. So one thing he talks about is ritualized activities to build courage. And, that's anything as simple as a pep talk before a football game. It could also be drumming and chanting before a battle, or it can be meditation before going in to serve as a caregiver for someone, you know, a ritualized activity that will remind you of your higher purposes, that will connect you to what's going on, to the reality. So I think that I would encourage people to look at their ritualized activities and see what might help build their courage, and that courage is directly related to your sense of purpose in your life. And I understand that people can't always find purpose in their life, and that's fine. You can still be courageous. I would say that a person's purpose in their life or meaning in their life shifts from hour to hour or day to day. So if the thing that is giving you the courage to get out of bed in the morning is as simple as, I need to feed the cat, that's your meaning in life at the moment. Even if it isn't overarching great purpose, we still have meaning in our actions. And if we constantly build these meanings and look for what gives us meaning, we will have more courage, because deeply held convictions evoke courage. Nietzsche said it, and I've requoted this repeatedly, haven't I, BJ? But the level of commitment to a courageous act is directly related to a felt sense of purpose. If we have our own why, we shall get along with almost any how.
Yeah, it's pretty darn effective stuff. I also like it. Well, I won't take us off course and keep wanting to tangent, but yeah.
Well, then let's just go to the last slide. I think it's the last slide, so we can hear some other wise people's comments.
Yeah.
All right, so this is a monoprint in my house, and it's titled "Meaning, Meaning, Meaning" by an artist of my husband's, a teacher of my husband's, and I just love it because it's chaotic and wild, and it's basically reminding us that the meanings in our life can be a little wild. And so let's just remember that in concluding thoughts of courage, you need 3 dimensions: knowing your fear, taking appropriate action, and having a higher purpose to that action. And all of our fears, in my opinion, derive back from our primary fear of non-being. And that's a whole existentialist stance. Rollo May said it, Paul Tillich said it, you know. So I think just looking at what it is we really fear and reducing it down to the absolute fear. Moral courage, important distinction. Moral courage comes from our beliefs, our higher purpose, what we want to be in the world. Vital courage comes from who we love and our connection with people. And I think that makes the distinction between moral courage and vital courage. Vital courage is more personal. It's more who you are and who you love. And moral courage is what you believe and what you want for the world.
In both cases, too, I think that you could point to they are inspired states. There's an inspiration coming from love or from meaning. There's an imbued, inspired state. Yeah, beautiful.
That's what I wanted to say. And I would
Brother
love
Tom,
to hear what other people have to say. I hope that was interesting and meaningful to folk. So I think we can open it up. And
yes, please. I'm going to pull us out of these slides. And just to remind folks, as Tom mentioned, he's kindly assembled some really good references for us, and this will all be included in the talk when we post it. So Tom, thank you, my friend. That's a lot of beautiful work and so much fun stuff to bounce off of. So let's open it up. Sonia, what's happening out there?
Hey, Definitely lots of comments, Tom, just mostly about bouncing off of the ideas you had and lots of interesting ideas. One question did come in, and the question is, how would you classify creative courage, the courage to artistically and creatively express controversial ideas in the face of possible repercussions? Would that be a form of moral courage?
The way Rollo May was the person who brought up creative courage, and frankly, he didn't define it exactly. But the way I interpreted creative courage is the leaps that artists take to bring something new into the world, to take a step outside of traditional teachings or what they know, and to trust themselves and to bring in something new in the world. That's the way I see creative courage.
Let's go to some hands. Vito, you've had your hand up for a while. And it might just be, this has happened before. Hi there, Vito.
Hi.
Hey, Vito.
My name's Vito. I'm a DJ at a film festival in Texas, which is where I think most people meet palliative care doctors. So contextualize, I have a strong artistic impulse, which started on acting, progressive filmmaking. I studied film in LA. It's very competitive. I had no help, no contacts. And at times it felt overwhelming. I was, when I was a boy, I was strongly targeted by envious people I trusted, and they really wanted me to make me doubt myself. And the courage part, or really the silver lining part, is they would hate this, but it also gave me this really ironclad will, because when I was at home, there were people actively trying to really crush my spirit. And then I would go to school, and I knew the answer to every question, and the teachers, really, they didn't just validate me, they saw my worth. So there's a part of me that just feels like, no, there's nothing wrong with me, no matter what those people at home said. So when I went into this new field, I worked to legitimize myself. I polished a screenplay. It won just these consecutive high-profile industry awards. I wrote and directed a half-hour documentary that ended up being accepted into what's considered the world's best documentary film festival, and it was awarded there. And how this involves Mettle is the documentary features elders who just had these devastating experiences in their youth they never thought they'd recover from, but they have a deeper understanding of in later life. And it was this type of Phoenix experience that attracted me to Mettle to begin with, when I heard BJ talk about his life for the first time. And making this documentary, I realized on a deeper level, I want to combine my creative impulse with a humanitarian one, which is what I feel like Mettle is doing, is trying to really humanize the medical field. So the next step is to put my work out there in streaming or whatever, but I don't know anybody, and I'm moving into this new space, this new industry, without any mentors or peers, and it feels really risky. And when I've reached out before, I would meet for help. I would meet not even just unprofessional people, but manipulative ones that were really similar to the people of origin. And I'm a kind man, I'm a peaceful man, and honest, but those are strengths that become liabilities in the business world. So I don't, well, it feels like I don't know how to protect myself at this critical crossroads. And the common knowledge is to hire a lawyer. I don't even know how to choose an effective lawyer. Because in the creative space, I feel comfortable, but in a business space, I don't. So this is why this is so perfectly timed, is I need courage right now, I realize, because I have these doubts rising that the little boy is going to get taken advantage of again by elders that he trusts. And that's how I'm positioning these people that could help me make the next step to humanize and give this humanitarian aspect to what I'm doing. And just I wanted to put that out there. I know there's no necessary answer other than the courage, but that's where I'm at right now.
Man, thank you. It's so good to hear your voice. I mean, I think I'm listening to you. It feels to me you are answering your own question here in a way that this next step will require courage. And you know that. And it sounds like in this sort of taxonomy we've laid out today, it sounds like a creative courage. And for you, it may be both coming from a moral place of justice, and a place of love, a vital courage. So it feels like you are hitting a lot of notes, and you've got your past experiences both to inform the fear that you're describing, and to Tom's point today, that relationship to the fear you may be feeling and the past relationship that you've had to this fear, you've got your own history of acting courageously. So I guess listening to you and wanting to encourage you on, I mean, to root you on here, I think you've got something in your past that can tell you what you need right now. And it seems to me that is creative courage, and it seems to me that's something you absolutely have access to. So anyway, those are just some reflections. Tom, anything further before we head on to the chat here?
No, I think you named that pretty well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Vito.
Vito.
Yeah, you keep us posted.
Okay, we got a few more hands and questions. So Tom and BJ, do you have a couple of minutes to go over? Just want to be respectful. Okay.
Sure.
So Yulia, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Please let me know when you're unmuted.
Bonjour, BJ, Tom, Sonia. Thank you so much for an amazing presentation, and Sonia for unmuting me. I'm Yulia. I spent almost 20 years in a legal field, including working with people who suffered loss of health, property, or their whole life, both who committed crime and suffered it. One day, having a 100% vision before, I woke up partially blind, with no evident reason why. And what was given me courage before appeared being not enough. Sometimes in my life, I was relying on faith, self-discipline, love, and it took me time to learn that saying goodbye is also a form of love. Would it be my body senses that I do not have anymore, or someone special in my life? And I imagine, BG, for you, it has been pretty much the same. What was also giving me courage was philosophy, research, investigation, and I still have Bhagavad Gita in front of me, even if I cannot read it anymore. I got my PhD at the University of Bologna, and it's not about the oldest alma mater. In Italy, art is everywhere. And I changed my attitude to art also. Now it what gives me energy, presence in the moment, another way to say self-discipline. And I've become a painter. I paint on wood that be accessories for tea ceremony, furniture, or even my cane for walking. And it has been part of my story. And I have two questions to you, BJ.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there is something apart from instinct of survival and love that drives our life? And the second, if you could give only one piece of advice to someone choosing whether to end or not his or her life, what would that be? Thank you.
Yulia, thank you. Those are some. Thank you for sharing a bit about yourself. It's so welcome here, and makes the point for us how courage is this thing in motion as you bob and weave with your life and new losses and different challenges and how you creatively respond. You are making the point so beautifully Now, to your questions, if I heard you right, the first one, do I think is there something besides love that pulls us through life? Is that the question, Yulia?
Yes.
Mm,
Mhm.
well, yeah, I suppose. I mean, so much of this depends how you look at it. So love is to me one of those uber, nothing needs to be kicked out of love. It's sort of one of these, maybe the sort of pan-relevant responses to life. And that can include everything. And that's part of its supreme potency. So in some ways, I could say everything, anything and everything, any other sort of sub-motivator or something could be forged, could still belong in the love bucket. But but that's almost a non-answer, even though I sort of believe that. I mean, to me, that is the thing that compels me forward. But if I'm honest, if I go down a little deeper and a little bit more specific, sometimes what's pushing me ahead is sometimes a dissatisfaction with my own life to date, or what I didn't get right yesterday, or the time I couldn't summon the courage, or when I couldn't feel creative, when I couldn't find the meaning. I am pulled along by my failures in this way, to use that word, or shortcomings, or where I might, long to try again, to have an opportunity to try again. That's a real compelling force for me. Curiosity is a very compelling force for me. Like, ooh, what's around this corner? What'll happen today? That can be a very powerful one. So there's a range of compulsions for me that have gotten me this far. And you might say they're all love, but there's some details in there, and they're not
There's
all savory.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I know this was to BJ, but I was really touched by your story, Yulia. And one thing that I realized is we didn't really talk about the role of faith in courage, except to say that each person defines what gives their life juice, what gives their life meaning. And for some people, that might be their faith. And I think that's fantastic. What we want in a life is for people to get up and have some meaning in their life and some reason to keep going. And sometimes that's really hard in the face of illness and loss. And so sometimes you can start kind of small, and that's where I tend to focus is smaller things. But the big things historically are incredibly sustaining for a mass of humanity, is to believe in their God and their religious dogma. And existentialists would say it's more ideal to find your personal meanings. But when we're talking about a higher purpose, I think that either can serve.
And amen. And Yulia, I want to also get to I'm looking at the clock too. Let's also get to your second question, which also harkens to something that I see in the chat here. I struggle to pay attention to the chat, so a lot of folks who are putting stuff in there, I rely on Sonia to pull them forward. So I may miss some, but I saw Mary, your quote that I think your question that gets at Yulia's second question. So maybe we can converge them a little bit. Let me just read it here. I'm also curious about how often your patients' clientele have considered the choice now available in California to have a medically induced death. How does this person not feel defeated, non-courageous, etc.? I think this gets at Yulia, your question about when one is hastening their own death, choosing it. We always have this sense that death is something that no one wants. But the truth is, at some point, death can actually be the thing that we pursue. And what's the difference here? If I'm working with people who are pondering hastening their own death, you might say this lens of courage is or meaning can be very helpful. If someone views in their person, in their story, if they view choosing to the moment of their own death, that can be, if that's a proactive choice, a meaningful choice to that person, well, that is the thing to key in on. Then it can be the compeller here can be courage. If, however, the person is choosing to hasten their own death because they are defeated, because they feel in the way, because they can't summon a meaningful act, and they're just trying to get this over with, well, it's not mine to judge, whether that's right or wrong per se. But I would say that if I'm working with that person, I would have a hard time it would be harder for me to bless, whatever that means, their own decision to die, until we can talk it through and reframe it and recast it as a not necessarily a flight from suffering, but a move towards something meaningful or courageous for them. That's not always accessible, but I'd probably try to hang on to that person with that person until they can make that transition, that internal transition, before making a big decision to end their own lives. So I don't know if that makes sense. A lot of words in there, but Mary, or Yulia, please jump back in if there's more to say there. It's a big question.
I guess, BG, Tom, there is not so much to add from my side. And thank you, Tom, for your remark about faith. For me, at a certain point, belief has been simple. We either believe or not. And yeah, BG, if possible, coming back, only one sentence of your advice to someone choosing whether to end or not her life, what would that be?
A sentence?
One sentence.
One sentence. Well, within the context of the legal framework of having a terminal illness and how people qualify to even ask that question in a medical way, putting all that stuff, that sort of legality and logistics aside, it might be something with, like, it's a dangerous question. It would matter so much to whom I'm talking in the circumstances. But to try to honor your question, it might have something like, is this a meaningful act for you as a final act? Is this consistent with your life, or is this a detour from your life? Is this consistent with who you are in the world, or is this a flight from who you are in the world? That is a very meaningful distinction, at least to me. Semicolon, have you considered other alternatives and other ways to kind of protect the high stakes of what's being asked? But to answer your question, Yulia, I think for now that would be my single question to ask them.
Thank you, BG. That's truly beautiful and touching.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Yulia.
Thanks, Yulia. Okay, we've got a few other questions and one other hand. Esther, I see you. I will get there. So one other person asked, what do you do with someone who is feeling lost, untethered, and without hope?
Well, and BJ and I gave a talk on hope, because that's real. And struggling with illness is definitely something that will make someone feel hopeless. I would say that being with them, supporting them is primary, but search for the things that mean something to them. And I know that that's sort of a too general a thing, but it is possible to delve into things that are meaningful at the moment. And they don't have to be big things. It could mean a latte or getting out to lunch. Move people into spaces where they can have something that's meaningful to them as a place to start. And that these things can have a tendency to build. In other talks, we talked about the elevating emotions as a way of focusing as opposed to always focusing on our losses. That sometimes remembering those joyful moments in our life can actually bring that back and build into our body the response of hopefulness.
I would also add just a reminder too of this, again, this sort of dialectic here. I might say to that person, besides what Tom's done there, normalizing the untethered feeling, that is part of the picture. But in some way, we're also saying that's a necessary part of the picture. That is the void into which courage is poured or summoned. Meaninglessness, purposelessness is the void into which we pour our meaning and our purpose. So you actually need to scrape that barrel of feeling lost and untethered to get to feeling found and tethered. It's a required piece of the puzzle. So that's the crucible where the courage comes.
It's completely right, BJ. Thank you. You said it better than I did. And in the chat, someone made a comment that I just want to try to correct. They talked about transforming fear into courage. And that's not the same thing, because to have courage, you need to be fearful, in my opinion, or my understanding of the history. And so that's the thing. A courageous person is a fearful person. A hopeful person is living in their uncertainty without answers. And so it isn't that it transforms, it's that you're holding both at once. And so if you're in a hopeless state, there is still the possibility of moving toward meaning and moving toward courage.
Right on.
Thank you both. This other question is about serious illness. Depending on the circumstances, serious illness can threaten the connection to higher purpose. Despair can really get in the way. What do you think the most effective way to reconnect or restore that connection is to the higher purpose when one is ill and struggling?
Well, I'll just jump in real quick because this is hard. Tom said it a moment ago. Like, take down the expectations, and you got to somehow, transcend and come up with some huge act here. No, it can be very small, subtle stuff to begin to find some toehold. So you're not in free fall. It can be tasting something, feeling air on your skin. Some grounding rituals can do it. Some sort of grounding in something elemental, something real, and something small. I think one of the reasons that we can get trapped in a void of courage or a void of meaning is where the expectations are out of whack. It's a distorted state, and we think we need to find some huge triumph. No, it's usually something more quotidian or mundane or simple that is actually the thing that allows us a toehold to climb out of that abyss.
Yep, I think the toeholds are vital. And I believe also that recognizing that every single one of us are struggling, so that we see the mailman, and we see our best friend, and we see the neighbor across the street, and recognizing that everyone is struggling and trying to find their way through this life. And each of us needs some courage. I think that recognizing that we are part of this whole world that is struggling to get by and get along, and the way to lift up to a finer plane of existence starts with toeholds. So like I said, it could be a latte today. Tomorrow it might be something bigger. But the aspects of courage, of the moral aspect of what do you believe and what's important, can bring us hope. And the vital aspect of our connection and love to the vital courage, our connection and love to another person, that is not to be underestimated in moving us forward in being happy in this world.
Esther, you have had your hand up for a while. Thank you so much for your patience.
Hey, no worries. Hello, Tom, and hello, BJ.
Esther.
Hey, been a minute. I just want to first acknowledge, BJ, your day and the anniversary. And, you're on my heart. And I really appreciate you doing this today. Hopefully it is, yeah.
Thank you, Esther.
Into kind of all the stuff we're talking about, or that you're talking about in terms of meaning, etc.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So many thoughts, and I don't have a question, just a couple of maybe things to throw into the mix. Starting from what was just being discussed, and maybe moving backwards, that idea of despair. This conversation is making me think a little bit about how we kind of quantify or qualify things, and sometimes it feels like we're not supposed to feel despair, or there's a right way to be and a wrong way to be. And so if we're in despair or in some of these kind of shadowland places, or whatever language we want to use, that the goal is to get out of that. And I might just posit that there's something valuable, and I think you spoke to it a bit, BJ, when you're talking about being untethered and moving toward being tethered, etc. Maybe there's something valuable about acknowledgement of being in despair, of kind of going, okay, this is where I am, this is the place that I am, and I'm sitting here in the dark woods. And so there's something in there around an acknowledgement and acceptance. And so, and then and being witnessed in that can be super, I don't know, maybe valuable to throw into the mix. Because I think sometimes when we're in really hard places, feeling lost, untethered, in despair, all of the things that may be a greater, I think there are a lot of messages out there that we're not supposed to feel that way, or that we're supposed to dip into that, but hey, carry on.
Yeah.
That's something about being in that place and just sitting in that place without judgment, without feeling judged, which can bring on shame, etc., is super powerful. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Something about sitting in the despair, acknowledgement, acceptance of it, and kind of and then talking about it. That in itself maybe is some kind of act of courage. And I think, I scratch my head about the fear component of courage, but I think I got to think about what is fear a little bit more, because I know that courage is defined as, in the OED, the ability to disregard fear. So it's a component. But maybe fear is more expansive. And then I wonder if there's also something about fortitude and endurance in the mix. Often when I'm sitting with a person and I think, oh, I'm just so blown away by what I would define as their courage, there's this kind of underpinning of fortitude and endurance, and it's marvelous. It just sit in wonder there. And then what you said, BJ, in response to Julia, pardon me, there's something in there around moral injury, that last act, whatever we choose, and there's no judgment around which is courageous, which isn't courageous. Who knows? It's, who knows? There's some piece in there maybe about moral injury that is the last thing we do in this lifetime, whatever our belief systems around moving into whatever we're moving into or not is. Is there moral injury or not? Do I want to be doing something that's going against my sense of moral code, and will it cause me moral injury? And maybe that's worth thinking about. So I really appreciate that. And then you also said to someone, and I would encourage you, and it just struck me, encourage, that we also have, both have spoken about it so much, that there is also, we're all shards of light. We all contain shards of light that are, oneness and oneness and separateness. And we have also the ability to encourage each other. Okay, so that's it for me. I just wanted to throw those into the pot. So thank you both again for today. And
Thank you, Esther.
Beautiful, Esther. We'll
Thanks,
let you.
Esther.
Yeah, it's perfect.
And with that, I think we got to everyone. Thank you both so much. And thank you everyone for being here with us. Happy weekend to everyone.
Thank you, Sons. Thank you, Sonia, for the imagery as always.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia.
My pleasure.
Thank you, BJ. That was a pleasure. I will be thinking of your sister today. I wish you well.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure being with you all.
Bye.
Peace out, tall.
Bye-bye.